One-hit wonders are everywhere. We've all heard those songs where an artist captured lightning in a bottle and took the world by storm, only to disappear into obscurity 6 months later. That happens in other industries too, whether it's a film director who gets lucky with the perfect script and the perfect cast, or perhaps an investor who got lucky once with Bitcoin, but hasn't fared so well with other ventures. You get the idea. But then, there are the evergreen experts, those rare individuals who can churn out hit after hit, whether it's prime Billy Joel or Ryan Tedder, whether it's Christopher Nolan or Steven Spielberg, or maybe it's Axel Grell, the designer of the Sennheiser HD600, HD650 and HD800. He proved many times at Sennheiser that he could produce a catalogue full of hits. But what about now that he's on his own? Back in December or maybe November of last year, a viewer of the channel called Amit reached out to me and offered me his pair of OAE-1s to review. I knew nothing about them at the time because I'm too busy making videos to stay in touch with all the latest developments and new product releases in the world of audio. That is, unless a manufacturer reaches out to me and tells me what's coming. And so with no idea of the pricing or the concept behind the OAE-1 headphones, I accepted Amit's generous offer. Time passed and I finally opened up the OAE-1s for my first listen. And my first impressions were mixed. The design is definitely cool, but I did notice a little bit of a sharp edge around these rings on the grills. The provided cables seem nice for the money, but they're not amazing, they're not fantastic. You get the two options here. You get one with a 3.5mm or 6.3mm connection and another with a 4.4mm connection. As you can see, they're basic ordinary cables. What I'm not so sure that I'm a fan of is the recessed 2.5mm connectors that go into the cups themselves. Either a single one in the case of the balanced cable or two in the case of the single-ended cable, which seems counterintuitive, but that's how it's done. Axel Grell's signature is also printed on the yoke on one side of the headphones, and at first glance, I thought I'd put a really bad scratch into Amit's headphones. Plugging them into the Live Harmony DAC and its accompanying Live HP2A headphone amp and preamp revealed a sound that's not entirely natural. But it is lots of fun. The OAE-1 has a noticeable sub-bass lift that makes them solid, rhythmic, and very enjoyable. They also deliver quite a good sense of soundstaging, but a fairly intimate or not overly deep soundstage. In other words, I think the width and separation is excellent at the price, but soundstage depth and layering isn't remarkable, it's just okay. Curiously, for a headphone designed to be as open as possible, covering up the headphones with your hands while you're listening makes basically no difference to their sound. That doesn't really tell us anything, but I thought it was curious. And it could be due to the fact that the drivers on these are actually placed on the front edges of the cups. They're not facing straight into the ear as we're used to on most headphones. Instead, they're literally placed on the side facing back at the ears as sound would normally approach the ears in a live situation. Now, whether that's actually making it better or not, I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to tell you how subjectively I experience them and let you work the rest out for yourself. By the way, before we get into the detailed sound quality and comparisons, I should tell you that the OAE-1s are relatively easy to drive. They have an impedance of 38 ohms and a sensitivity of 106 decibels per volt. And I specify per volt because it's different to what most manufacturers use, which is per milliwatt. And so their sensitivity translates to about 93 decibels per milliwatt, making them okay in terms of sensitivity. They're not super sensitive, but they're also not too hard to drive. And that means you can get the OAE-1s to dangerous listening levels of about 110 decibels with just 60 milliwatts of power. And so realistically, any device with a headphone jack should be able to drive the OAE-1 to a sufficient level of power for safe listening. As always though, the amount of power does not correlate with the quality of power, and so it's best to pair any audiophile headphones with a decent audiophile DAC, dongle, headphone amp, etc. And so as I listened more and more to the OAE-1, a few things became apparent. Firstly, the OAE-1 is quite a comfortable headphone. The clamping force is quite firm, but I found them fairly comfortable, even on longer listening sessions of an hour or more. Interestingly, there's a new version of the OAE1 listed over on Drop now, and with the new version, they've kept the tuning and the specifications all the same, I believe, but they've changed the colour scheme, and they've also reduced the clamping force just a little bit. So maybe that was an issue for some people. I had no problems with it. The other thing that I started to notice about the OAE1s as I listened to them more and more is just how much I was enjoying them. For $299 US, or actually currently the new version are selling at $249 US, as at the time I wrote up this video anyway, the OAE1s sounded to me like a fantastic headphone, at least in isolation. It's important not to forget though that Meze Audio have also recently released a headphone in this category, that being the $399 US 105 AER. Yes, it cost a bit more money than the current release of the OAE1, but they're in the same general ballpark. And so that of course raises the question, should you spend a bit more and get the 105 AER from Meze Audio, or is the OAE1 just as good or even better for less money? And while we're at it, I don't want to forget the quirky but very lovable ETA Ada headphone. As I said, it's very quirky and it's less finished and polished than something like the OAE1, but it's undeniably enjoyable and it could be a great option for some of you. Starting the comparisons off with the OAE1 playing It Ain't Necessarily So by Jamie Cullum, and the sense of clarity, separation and timbral accuracy from the OAE1s is properly great. These definitely have a slightly coloured tuning, some might say a very coloured tuning, but they don't throw off the timbre of instruments. Everything still sounds right to your ears, just coloured a little bit like it's playing in a certain style of room. In other words, everything still sounds right. My only hesitation with the sound of the OAE1s was that I did feel like the soundstage just lacked depth, as I've already said. However, the sense of articulation and clarity pretty quickly drew my attention away from the soundstage because it's so enjoyable. Instead of focusing on the soundstage, I started noticing that I could hear things like the vibration of the double bass strings when they were plucked, and I could hear the texture of the brushes on the drum skins. The attack and percussiveness of Jamie Cullum's piano was equally impressive. And then swapping to the 105 AERs produced a noticeably thicker sound through the lower mid-range. But at the same time, it was also slightly sharper in the treble. The treble from the OAE1 is precise and clean, but also more refined than what I was hearing from the 105s. Where the 105s were comfortably better though, was in their sense of soundstage layering and depth. Ultimately, both of these headphones are fantastic, and each has their trade-offs. The 105 has slightly less refined treble. The OAE1 has slightly less soundstage depth, or actually quite a bit less soundstage depth. On top of that, on a track like Notion, I felt like the OAE1's enhanced sub-bass and lower bass went just a little bit too far on sounds like the kick bass there. That could be that the mix has been overdone, but it's always a challenge when you start to get a headphone that's got any significant sense of enhancement. If you then play that headphone with a track that's got its own enhancements, you get double enhancement and it can be too much. Swapping through some more tracks and bringing the ETA Ada into the mix reminded me just how good the Adas are on vocals. The sense of focus on vocals from the Ada is compelling. But the tonality was a little bit boxy and unnatural on this particular track. On top of that, the Adas are also undeniably bass light. The Adas are definitely not a headphone for bass heads, but I don't care, I love them. And I also love me some bass. The staging from the Adas is intimate, much like the OAE1s. And also, like the OAE1s, the Ada's separation of sounds within that relatively flat soundstage is excellent. Swapping back then to Axel Grell's New Baby reveals a tonality from the OAE1s that I think overall is more balanced than the Adas, but there's some areas that still sound a bit wonky on this track, and again, it could be the track. The OAE1 is definitely still more spacious than the Ada, but it does also still fall short of the 105 AER. As you'd expect though, the OAE1 delivers bass that's more present and authoritative than either of them. I also feel like articulation, that sense of clarity and attack in the sound, is also better from the OAE1s than the Adas, but it's not by a huge margin. And so in reality, as I compared the Adas and the OAE1s, what became very clear is that these are two very different headphones that are probably too different to properly compare. You'll either love both of these for very different reasons, or you'll be drawn just to one or to the other. And so after spending a couple of weeks listening to the OAE1s, How I feel about them at the end of it all is I'm going to be a little bit sad to send them back. I think they're a fantastic headphone for their price. I love the bass tuning of them. I love the separation and clarity of them. And as I've already said, I just wish they were able to project a little bit more sense of depth and layering in the soundstage. But I know that many of you don't prioritize that and it's more about soundstage width. If that's your cup of tea, the OAE ones are fantastic, especially at the new lower price. I can't really think of a headphone at $250 or even $300 that I would choose over these. Perhaps the HT6XX, but I don't have that here to compare. And so if you're keen to pick up a pair of OAE ones for yourself, I'll put a link in the description down below where you can go and check it out, see if it's still available. I haven't checked at the time of recording, but hopefully it will become a headphone that's a staple on drop and you'll be able to pick it up whenever you want to. Of course, if you're like me and you prefer a bit of depth and layering in your soundstage, then the 105 AER is my definite recommendation. I'll put my video of that one up here next, explaining why I think it is almost as good as the 109 Pro that costs a whole lot more money. So check that one out if you want soundstage depth, use the link below if you want the OAE ones. And for now, of course, a huge thanks once again to Amit for lending me his OAE ones, and also a huge thanks to YouTube channel members, to channel Patreon members, and to those of you that leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.